Hey there, it's John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to the Kaladesh Pre-Release Primer. Today we're going to talk about all things pre-release for Kaladesh. So if you've never gone to a pre-release before, especially, we're going to talk about things like what you should bring with you, what you can expect when you go. We'll talk about the new mechanics in the set if you haven't been able to follow too closely to like set reviews and reveals and all that stuff over the last few weeks. We're also going to talk about synergies between different colors and what they're trying to do together. And we'll wrap things up with a quick overview of the inventions that you'll see as you open packs. Now, if you've watched one of our pre-release primers in the past, this is going to be very, very similar. I try to gear these mostly towards new players, but there are some additional information, especially towards the end, on inventions and some of the archetypes that might be interesting to everybody. So just wanted to throw that out there. Having said that, quickly before we get started, if you check out the description below, you'll see a link to our Amazon affiliate store. And if you make any purchases through that store, a small percentage will come back to help the channel. So thank you all in advance for looking at that. And as always, thank you to the patrons on Patreon that make these videos possible as well. Having said that, let's get into the Kaladesh information. And let's begin with, what should I bring? If I've never gone to an LGS before and played in a pre-release, what do I need to take with me? Fortunately, you don't need to bring too much. In fact, you're going to get a lot of stuff in your pre-release pack. So what do you want to consider bringing? First thing I would say is sleeves. Sleeves are incredibly important. Now, some people don't care as much about the condition of their cards and collecting the cards and that sort of thing. They just want to play, and that's fine. But I would still recommend bringing sleeves because a lot of times tables at LGSs are not always the cleanest. And when cards start sticking together when you're trying to shuffle them, especially by the last round or so, it can get kind of frustrating. So I would bring sleeves. Now, typically of a 40 card deck, 50 sleeves is probably enough. That gives you 10 extras in case some break, but definitely bring extras because you don't want to break a sleeve and then have to buy a whole pack of sleeves when you're at the store. That's just a little frustrating. Another thing that you want to take with you is dice, and it can be just any dice you have. If anything that's available is fine. Some people will buy fancier dice sets, and that's fine too, but whatever you have to keep track of the game state as far as counters on creatures. Fabricate is a mechanic we're going to look at in just a few moments that requires you to keep track of counters on creatures. Deck boxes may or may not be necessary. I always said bring a deck box in the past to organize your cards, but they do give you a deck box now, even though it's kind of a cardboard box, but it will definitely last you through the day at least, if nothing else. So you do get one, but sometimes it is nice to bring an additional box or binder, especially if you're playing in multiple events and you want to break out your cards after you're done into different groups, like perhaps cards I want to keep, cards I want to trade, that type of thing, just so they don't get confused if you play into another event. Pen and paper, huge. A couple things about the paper. Now, you do get a spin down dice, a 20-sided dice, with your pre-release kit, and you can use that to keep track of your life. A lot of people will, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's totally fine. But if you're interested, at least eventually getting into more competitive Magic, it's good to start to get in the habit of keeping track of life totals, both you and your opponents, on paper, because that's really how it's done in competitive Magic. And if there's ever a discrepancy and a judge comes over and needs to figure out what happened, they're going to be able to look at that and use it as a log to figure out the order of events. So that becomes very important. Again, not necessary, but if it's something you're interested in the future of kind of graduating onto bigger events, you may want to start doing it here. Pens, game stores run out of pens, and there's things you're going to have to fill out. Usually stores will have registration forms for the event. If you don't have a DCI number, then you're going to have to fill out a DCI form, so you'll need a pen to do that, and either you'll have to wait in line for a pen, which will be frustrating, or I've seen stores even sell pens on event days just because they don't have enough to give away, so they try to discourage people and hopefully get them to remember to bring pens by charging for them, and you don't want to pay for a pen at a game store. So yeah, definitely try to remember that. I think that's the most important stuff. I mean, as far as other things you could bring, yes, some people like playmats. I don't think they're necessary, especially if you have sleeves on your cards, considering these are usually shorter events, only a couple rounds, up to 4 or 5 rounds typically, although different stores do different things. I think that's important to point out too. A lot of stores will run 4-round Swiss, and then based on your record, there'll be certain prize payouts. Others will run it like a full-on tournament based on how many people are there, and that could run more than 4 rounds. A lot of times those typically run about 5 rounds at most stores, I think, but the prize payouts are much greater at the top for players that can potentially win the tournament or come in second or third, usually, from what I've seen. I've seen folks do premium events where they cost more to get in, but the prize pool is bigger. Usually you'll find less people in those events, but some stores will run those. Other stores will combine their pre-release with other prizes, maybe give away like a box of Eternal Masters or something. Those are usually really big events that take a long time because you'll have a lot of people in them, and if they happen to do those at midnight, that could be an all night into early morning thing. So be advised, different stores will do different things. Check with your local game store what they do. A lot of stores will also run two-headed giant events. Typically they use those in conjunction with regular one-on-one events. So maybe on the Sunday, for example, I've seen a lot of stores do their two-headed giant on Sunday, or Saturday they're doing mostly the regular events. I have seen some stores do drafts, although I don't think they're supposed to do drafts anymore, but I have seen that happen, so sometimes they're also drafting. So all of that I think important to know if you've never gone to a pre-release before. All right, here's the pre-release kit I mentioned. So this is what you would get. Now, when you open this up, what you'll find in here is 6 packs of Kaladesh and also 1 foil promo card with the date stamped on it, and that is going to be any rare or mythic rare from the set at random. You can use that promo card in your deck building. So you have your 6 packs and that promo card, and you can build your deck from those tools. You're also going to get your 20-sided spin down die like I mentioned, and there's also some other collateral in there. For example, they usually give you a little 1-page sheet that kind of explains sealed and how to build a sealed deck. It's very brief though. It's not going to give you a whole lot of detail, but at least gets you started. Now, last time around we got a foil double-sided zombie token in our pre-release kit. This time we're getting something a little bit different, and it's this Thopter token that you can kind of build, and it's actually kind of cool. Some of the LGSs actually may have already built these, but Wizards sent them huge like airships that they could build out of like cardboard, and they looked really amazing and really complicated. This is like a smaller version of that you'll find in your pre-release kit. So it's kind of like a cardboard card that you punch out the pieces and they fit together. It actually looks kind of fun, so I'm looking forward to see what it looks like. And it's unique, it's different than just a token, for example. So I think it's a cool idea. It's kind of hard to see, granted, on this background because everything's so colorful, but it's the thing right in the middle. If you can pick that out. All right, let's talk about the new mechanics that are in Kaladesh, and these are mechanics that we've seen for the first time. There's going to be evergreen mechanics, of course, too, like flying and scry and prowess mechanics you're probably used to, but these are the 3 brand new ones. First, we have Fabricate. Fabricate is actually a pretty versatile mechanic, and you're also going to find a lot of flicker effects and bounce effects in the set, which play really well with Fabricate. But basically what it does is when the creature enters the battlefield with Fabricate, it's going to have a number on it, whether it's Fabricate 1, 2, or 3, for example. And if it's Fabricate 1, like in this case, when this enters the battlefield, you have a choice of either putting a +1/+1 counter on it, or giving yourself a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. So this is either 4/3 with a token, or it's a 5/4. So you make the decision whether it's more important to go tall or go wide at any given time, and can lead to some pretty complex decision making when you're casting your cards. And I always like cards that give versatility, so I think this is a pretty cool mechanic. You're going to find Fabricate in a number of different colors in the set. Next we have Energy, and Energy is a brand new resource, and if you haven't been watching the reveals of the cards and everything, that symbol on the card is the Energy symbol. Now in this particular example, when this card comes into play, you get 2 energy counters, and at any time you can pay 2 energy counters to put a +1/+1 counter on this card. Now you're going to notice a lot of energy cards will give you energy and also give you an opportunity to pay out energy. Some will just give you energy without a payout, and others will just be a payout basically. So you do want to keep that in mind when you build your deck. When you have good payouts for energy, it may behoove you to put a lot of cards in your deck that are going to give you energy, and then you have to really think about when and where you want to use that energy. So again, another relatively complicated mechanic with a lot of decision making around it, and I do think it's pretty cool. One thing to note, Wizards has made some energy tokens to put out, and basically the idea is it's a card that you would put down on the table, and then maybe you could put a die on top of it to notate how many energy counters you have. Unfortunately, these did not get included with the first shipment of Kaladesh. So when you go to your pre-release, they won't have those available. So some people are making their own tokens. Some stores are using Pokemon energy tokens, because now I've never played Pokemon. A lot of you all out there probably have and know more than I do about it, but apparently there are some energy token type cards in that game, so a lot of stores are using those, which is kind of cool. I think that's a good idea. But at the end of the day, if you just have another dice that you can use to notate how many energy counters you have, that's going to be sufficient, as long as you and your opponent both know which dice is which and how you're keeping track of those, and you're on the same page. It's going to be just fine. Now, what's particularly cool about this mechanic, I think, is it's another resource. So I can pay energy into something, I get an effect, but I still have all my mana untapped. I can still cast a spell. So I feel like you could have some pretty big swingy turns with energy. Finally, the last new mechanic is vehicles, and vehicles are interesting. They're artifacts. They have a power and toughness. However, they have a crew cost as well. And until you pay that crew cost, they are not creatures, and they don't have a power and toughness that's active. So you have to remember that. In other words, if this is on the battlefield, I can't lightning bolt it and destroy it until it is turned into an artifact creature by having the player play the crew cost. Now, the crew cost is tapping any number of creatures you control with power X or more, depending on whatever the crew cost is. So in this case, you have a crew cost of 1, so if you tap a 1/1 creature, that will bring this to life as a 2/3 flyer until end of turn. You can do that to attack, or you can even do it defensively to block. Now, it is important to note that vehicles do have summoning sickness, so they can't attack the turn they come into play unless they have haste. Very similar to a land if you animate the land. If you just play the land and you animate it, it still has summoning sickness unless you can give it haste. Same thing with these, just think of them the same way. Now, if I play a 1/1 creature, for example, on that turn, even though that creature has summoning sickness, I can still tap that creature to pay the crew cost. That's still okay because the crew cost is allowing me to do that. But normally, if I just play the vehicle, I wouldn't be able to attack in with it that turn. So I think that's important to note. Really awesome mechanic, though. I'm really excited about it. It allows you to kind of take your small creatures from the early portion of the game that might not be relevant anymore and upgrade them by tapping them and turning on a much bigger threat. Really awesome. Now, the thing to remember about these is when you're building your limited deck, don't consider these creatures when you are counting up your cards. Now, think of these more like equipment than creatures. If you go too strong with these, it's not going to feel good because you won't have the crew to turn them on, right? So you want to just sprinkle probably a few of these in your deck. Use the top end ones, your best ones, and you'll find some value there, but just be careful not to overdo it or to think of them as creatures in your building process. All right, now we're going to talk about the acronym BREAD real briefly. Basically, these are some tips to kind of help you keep things straight when you're trying to build your limited deck. And let's start off with B first, and B stands for bombs. Bombs are your win conditions. Now, these could be big evasion creatures. That's probably what they are usually, like some big flying creature or something like that. But they could also be a powerful planeswalker that can help you win through attrition. So here's a few examples of bombs. If you're lucky enough to open one of these cards, for example, this could be a win condition for you. This could really take over a game and allow you to get the victory. Now, you might get a lot of great bombs, and you may have to decide which ones you can run or can't run based on the rest of your card pool and what other good support cards they have leading up to them. So you can't necessarily shoehorn and say all 3 of these cards that you see in one deck. If you were super lucky and opened all 3 of them, you'd have to probably make a decision of which maybe 1 or 2 you could work in. Next, we have removal, and obviously it makes sense. If you have bombs trying to get across, your opponent may have the same. You're going to have to get rid of their bombs. So removal comes in a lot of different forms. You have a card like Hunt the Weak, which is going to be a fight mechanic in green. You have Unlicensed Disintegration, which is an incredibly powerful removal spell, but it does require 2 different types of mana color. And then you have a card like Revoke Privileges, which is an enchantment that you almost want to think more as a tempo play, because again, there's so many flicker and bounce effects in this set that might not last for very long, but it might be around long enough for you to get your damage across. Evasion. Now, you want to think kind of in the middle of your curve. You're looking for creatures that are going to be able to get around a board stall. You want a few flyers or creatures that perhaps in certain situations can't be blocked. Things that are going to almost guarantee that you'll be able to continue to get damage across as the board state gets a little more heavy. Here's a few examples. We have a couple creatures with flying here. There's a creature with menace. Even trample works somewhat. You can still block trample, of course, but a lot of times some of the damage will still get across. So anything like that is going to allow you to keep pouring damage in and getting past some of your opponent's blockers. It's very good to have some of those cards in your build. Aggro. So you want to think early curve. Now we talked about the mid curve with like the evasion creatures. We talked about the late curve a lot of times with your bombs, but you need to stay alive to get there. So you need a lot of small creatures. 2-drops are incredibly important, and these are going to be your small aggressive creatures that can do a lot of work early, and then later on they can either double block if needed or perhaps pilot a vehicle. You'll hopefully find other uses for them as the game continues. But these are cards like you see on the screen here. I mean, cheap creatures with haste are good examples. Flying creatures that are cheap. Creatures that start off small but potentially could get larger as the game goes on. Those can be very relevant. And finally, you have duds. And duds sounds negative, but it really isn't. Duds are basically cards that are going to be in your sideboard. These are cards you're not going to main deck for whatever reason, but don't forget they're there because in certain matchups, they could be very, very good for you. And here's a few examples. Pressure Point, maybe not a super exciting card, but there are times you come up against an opponent that maybe has one creature that's very difficult for you to get around. Or Lost Legacy, probably not something you want to main deck because you just don't know what your opponent's playing, but if it turns out that they're playing a non-artifact threat that's really strong, you can preempt that perhaps with Lost Legacy. Appetite for the Unnatural, I would argue that in Kaladesh you could actually probably main deck this, but you might not want to main deck like 3 of these right away until you see what your opponent's playing. Now if they're all in on artifacts, then maybe bring in another copy. All right, let's talk about synergy a little bit and the different archetypes you'll find. And one thing I would like to point out, now if you're playing draft, archetypes become incredibly important. They're very, very important when you're trying to draft a deck. In sealed, they're a little less important, but I still think they're important. You want to be aware of what the colors are trying to do together, and you want to look for those synergies because they're going to give you value, they're going to give you advantages, and if you ignore them, you might not have as strong of a deck, even in sealed, as your opponent might have. So we're going to talk about all of the color combinations real quick and just briefly kind of explain what they're trying to do together. First, we have Azorius, white-blue. This is a very, very controlling color. You're going to find a lot of counter spells, a lot of bounce spells. They're trying to slow the game down to a grind and try to win with some flying creatures. So you want to watch out for those potential synergies when you're trying to build around those colors. Next, you have Orzhov, white and black. Now, it's actually pretty interesting. Orzhov has a lot of Fabricate involved because white has Fabricate, black has Fabricate. It's able to create a lot of those servo tokens, and then it can sacrifice those servo tokens for stronger effects on many of the black cards, like you see here with Morbid Curiosity. It's kind of a cool idea, and even if you have to sacrifice another artifact, you have cards like Restoration Gearsmith to bring it back to your hand from your graveyard. So you'll find a lot of interesting back and forth with this particular color combination. Boros, maybe one of the more powerful ones. This one seems really fun to me. You have dwarfs as a tribal element, as you can see here with Depala, Pilot Exemplar. She's buffing dwarfs because you're going to find a lot of them in white. Also, they play really well with vehicles, both the white and red cards in the set. Doesn't have to be just white and red. There are some other cards that play well with vehicles, but you're going to find the majority of them in these 2 colors. So what Boros is trying to do is start off small and aggressive with a lot of small creatures just getting in there for damage. And then once your opponent's able to play some blockers, that's when the vehicles come down and those small creatures start jumping in vehicles and get that last bit of damage across. Seems like it could be actually a lot of fun to play. Next we have Selesnya, and Selesnya is cool because white and green both have Fabricate. White having a lot of flicker effects, of course that works well with Fabricate, but green is also really strong in energy. So you can use those flicker effects on both the Fabricate creatures and the cards that are bringing you energy to the table. And that energy, in green anyway, wants to be converted into +1/+1 counters. So it starts to form this momentum where slowly but surely you start getting bigger and bigger creatures. Now this color can either go tall or go wide. You're going to find a lot of trample in it if it wants to go tall, or you're going to find the ability to make a lot of small creatures if you want to go wide. Engineered Might is a great example of what Selesnya is trying to do, giving you the option to either give a creature +5/+5 and trample and just get in damage that way, or giving all your creatures +2/+2 in vigilance. I think that's a very elegant card that describes this color perfectly. Next we have Dimir, black and blue. Not too different from Orzhov in a lot of ways. Instead of flicker effects, blue's taking advantage of the bounce effects and having you recast the spells. So again, you have the black and fabricate, you have a lot of energy production in blue, and between the more controlling elements of blue, it's a variation of what we saw in Orzhov. Next we have Izzet, and Izzet is all about energy production and control. It makes tons of energy. It wants to use that energy to help buff the spells, but at the same time it also has some great payouts, like Whirler Virtuoso is a wonderful payout for energy to get 1/1 Thopter tokens with flying that can just get in there for damage, right? There is still that Spell Matter sub-theme that we saw in Shadows over Innistrad. It might not be quite as strong here because it's bringing in energy, trying to do some different things, but it is definitely a twist on what we've been seeing in the past. Next we have Simic, and Simic is another high energy color combination. Green makes energy, blue makes energy. This time you do have your green creatures that are growing, similar to other builds with green, but this time you also have the blue to control the board state and try to back them up a little bit so that they can get by with damage, especially the bigger creatures. Next we have Rakdos, and Rakdos is aggressive. In a lot of ways it's similar to Boros. It's probably the second best color combination to play with vehicles. Again, you'll have a lot of small creatures. You also have some stronger removal spells this time around. You have things like Unlicensed Disintegration, which is maybe the best removal spell in the set, even though it does cost you 1 black and 1 red, which could be a little harder to swing sometimes. Next is Golgari, and Golgari is kind of cool because it's trying to award you for +1/+1 counters. Again, you have 2 colors that have Fabricate, which is cool, and you also have energy coming to the table with green, and that energy then being converted to counters. Cards like Hazardous Condition that are going to award you for having counters, or Fairgrounds Trumpeter, which are going to award you for having counters on your creatures. And finally you have Gruul. Gruul is all about the beats. This doesn't feel too different than what Gruul is usually doing. However, there's a nice energy twist on it because both of these colors are all in on energy. Now you can hopefully use the energy in conjunction with your other spells to grow creatures faster and really put on a real strong front of huge creatures. This seems like it will be a lot of fun too. Alright, so those are the archetypes to kind of watch for. Now, like I said, in Sealed, they might not be as well flushed out as you could build in Draft, for example, but I still think it's important to be aware of them when you're building your Sealed pool. The last thing I have to talk about is Inventions. Now, for those of you who have not been watching the reveals, this is actually some pretty big news. If you're familiar with the Battle for Zendikar block, a lot of this will make sense, but back in Battle for Zendikar and Oath of the Gatewatch, they created something called Expeditions. They were extremely rare cards. 5 of the cards from Battle for Zendikar were 5 of the cards from the set, and those were the rare land cycle. But all the other expeditions were cards from the history of Magic, throughout the history of Magic. They were all foil, and the approximate pull rate of these cards were about 1 in 144 booster packs. So they were quite rare, and they looked amazing, quite honestly. And they reprinted cards that a lot of people love to play and are cube staples and even legacy and modern staples, so there was a high demand, especially for certain cards that were printed. So Shadows over Innistrad occurred and that block happened, and we didn't see anything like that. But because these were so popular in Zendikar, the announcement was made that Expedition style cards are coming back, and not only are they going to be in Kaladesh and Aether Revolt, but they're going to be in every standard set going forward. Collectively, they're going to be known as masterpieces. However, the cards in Kaladesh are going to be known as Inventions. So whereas the Expeditions were lands, this time around we're going to see artifacts, and basically the same rules apply. 1 in about 144 packs will have one of these. They're extremely rare, which means if you are lucky enough to pull one at your pre-release, hang on to it and make sure nobody tries to pull a fast one on you and tell you it's not worth much or what have you, because these are going to be really valuable cards, and some of them a little more than others obviously, but there are a few of them currently already going for $100 to $250 range, right? Now there's some that are cheaper, but again, long-term investment, I think all these cards are gonna be great long-term investments. These cards look beautiful, and I can't imagine how amazing they're gonna look when they're in foil. Couple things you need to know about them other than how rare they are. If you happen to open one in Draft or Sealed, you can play with it in that Draft or Sealed pool. So even though it's an older card perhaps, or a reprint of a very old card, you can still play with it in Limited. Now, you can't play all these cards in all the constructed formats. For example, you can only play an invention card that is already legal in that particular format. So if I open a Ether Vial, for example, in my Kaladesh pack, I can't throw it in my standard deck because Ether Vial is not legal in standard. However, if I open a Gearhulk, which actually is in Kaladesh, then I can play that in my standard deck. So you do want to be aware of that. All right, having said all of that, let's look quickly at all these inventions because they look incredible. The first thing you're going to notice here is the theme of this is the Inventors Fair. So all of these are inventions that are on display at the fair, and you're going to kind of notice that in the artwork. It looks so incredible. So the first one is Ether Vial, and this is a very, very popular card, obviously, in some of the Eternal formats. This card is fantastic in tribal decks. Merfolk decks want to run this. Elf decks, I've seen this in Sliver decks. It's a very valuable card, actually. Getting a normal copy of this will run you $40, $50 as is. So you know that this special version is going to be incredible. Cataclysmic Gearhulk. Now, all 5 Gearhulks from Kaladesh are going to be in here as well with different art, of course, and the art just is incredible. I love how they're on display at the fair and you have the people standing in front of them. They look awesome. Now, much like the rare cycle of lands that had expeditions and Battle for Zendikar, these will probably be the least valuable cards for the most part. However, these are really good cards and they are going to see standard play. Some of these will see modern play. I think this one, for example, will see modern play. These are going to see cube play, commander play, and because of that, even though they might start off a little cheaper than some of the other inventions, long term, there's still going to be a lot of value attached to these, so don't be fooled by that. You probably still want to hang on to these even if they're worth a little less than some of the others. Champion's Helm. This is a cool inclusion because it was only printed one time in Commander products in 2011, which was a long time ago, so you can never get this in foil before. So players do use this in Commander as their first chance to get it in foil. Next we have Chromatic Lantern, and not as old as some of the cards on the list, and maybe financially not as big of a card. It's from Return to Ravnica, so a few years old, but it's still very beautiful looking nonetheless. Next we have Chrome Mox, and maybe this isn't as popular as the other Mox we're going to look at in a few minutes, but it's still a very strong card. What holds this back financially is the fact that it's banned in Modern, so because it's closed off to that format, there's not as many players looking for it, but you know what, it still sees play in Eternal formats. Awesome cube card. Cloudstone Curio, maybe not as high financially as some of the other cards again, but this art looks incredible. Like, I can't wait to see what this looks like in foil. The reflection, it looks like there's somebody like looking at the display and their reflection is in the artifact. Really cool. Combustible Gearhulk. Here's another one of the Gearhulks. Of course, this is the red one. Again, I love the people in front of the display. It's just awesome. Crucible of Worlds. Hey, it's actually a Crucible this time. The art on this one, I don't know, seems a little plainer than some of the others, but at the same time, it is a Crucible, and I think it is going to be pretty cool looking in foil with the blue overlay, so I'm looking forward to seeing it. Very, very popular card, not only for folks that play some of the Eternal formats, but also for casual players. This is a card that desperately needs a true reprint. Hopefully we'll see one, maybe in the next Modern Masters. Gauntlet of Power, another card that was never reprinted actually. It's from Time Spiral, and it's a popular Commander card, so it's kind of cool to see this get a printing. Over the years, this creeped up to like a $10, $15 card. Again, these cards aren't going to impact the financial aspect of the older versions of the card. There's just not enough of them out there to do that, but it's still cool to see this in new art, and at least some players will be able to grab a copy. Hangerback Walker. This is actually a cool inclusion. Back when Kaladesh was being spoiled, I kind of thought they probably won't reprint Hangerback Walker since it was in Magic Origins, and it did see a lot of constructed play in Standard. Actually, all the way back to Vintage, this card saw play. So I figured they want to push their luck by trying to print it again, and they didn't. But at the same time, at least they gave us this version of it included as an invention because it looks incredible, and you get that Kaladesh flavor, which is where this card was supposed to be from Magic Origins. So I think this is really cool. Lightning Greaves. This was actually an uncommon originally in Meriden, and even though it was an uncommon and it saw a lot of printings, it was still like a $5, $6 card. It's a huge Commander card. So even though, again, financially it's not huge, I think getting a copy of this with the new art to play in like your Commander deck or cube or something is still really sweet. Lotus Petal. This was actually a common back in Tempest. That tells you something about the state of Magic back then, huh? This did see a reprint from the vault, so it has had a foil version before, but of course this is brand new art. Looks incredible. Maybe my favorite piece of art in the set. Definitely my top 2, I think. Looks incredible, and of course this is an amazing card. Mana Crypt. This one's kind of funny to me because so many years ago, way back, this card was a promotional card that you could only get from buying one of the novels, sending the coupon in, and they send you the card, and that was it. That was the only way to get this card for so very long, and it was a very expensive card. It did see play in Commander, sometimes Vintage, but definitely Commander and Cubes, you would see it mostly. The card was reprinted finally after all these years in Eternal Masters. It was a mythic rare in that set, and of course it had the art that was given to it in the Magic Online version of the card. This time it's back again. After all these years we didn't see Mana Crypt. Now it's been printed twice. This time again with new art. It looks incredible. Right now this is the highest valued card in the set, although I do think the one we're about to look at next may give it a run for its money. And that's Mana Vault. Mana Vault was printed, it was one of the original Magic cards, Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, Revised. It was in 4th edition, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think it got printed again. I don't think it made it to 5th. I could be wrong about that. But it was cut off in the early years of Magic, obviously, as people figured out how powerful this card was. And this has never seen a foil printing before, and that's a big deal. First time you can get this in foil. Players that play with this card in cubes and such, they will want a foil version. So this one is right now the second highest valued card, but again, it could perhaps become the first. I would not be surprised by that. I also like the art a lot. The original Mana Vault art was cool. I actually really like the old art, but I don't know what it was supposed to be. It didn't feel like a vault to me, but they did take that square sort of object design and turn it into a vault here, which is pretty cool. Mind's Eye. This was a card that was included in the Commander's Arsenal as a foil, and it had different art on that version compared to the original version, and now we get another piece of art. So again, another good Commander card. Mox Opal. So this Mox is maybe a little more pricey and probably a little more popular than the Chrome Mox we saw earlier because it does see play in Affinity decks. So hey, Affinity cards, they're popular. This one's no exception. This was printed again in Modern Masters 2015, not all that long ago, a little over a year ago. Still about a $35 card. Noxious Gearhulk. Of course, here's the black Gearhulk. Painter's Servant. Now, Painter's Servant is kind of a niche card, but the folks that play this card are really kind of all in on it. This is a card that combos with Grindstone and Legacy in the Painter's Grindstone deck. Very popular there. And it saw a little bit of a price boost a few months back when players were trying to deal with the Eldrazi Menace because it's a good sideboard card against some of the Eldrazi strategies. And it took a nice little price bump at that point, got up to around $18, and it really hasn't come down. So I think this is a cool inclusion. Personally, one of my favorite pieces of art too. I think this card looks incredible and the flavor text is really cool. I kind of wonder if we will see Grindstone and Aether Revolt maybe, and if you're 1 in a million chance of putting that combination together in limited, that would be kind of crazy if you could do it. But this is a very cool inclusion. I always like to see Shadowmoor cards included because that set did have a lower print run, so it's kind of nice whenever you see at least another chance, even though it's a very limited chance, of getting a copy of one of those cards. Rings of Bright Hearth. Speaking of Magic sets that had more limited runs, Lorwyn was another one. The art on this actually looks very similar to the original art. It's a little more flushed out, there's a little more going on, but it's very true to it. Still looks really cool, and it's another good inclusion. Scroll Rack, another card that was in Commander's Arsenal as a foil. Nice, again, to see it included here as well. Sculpting Steel, another card that financially isn't like huge, but it's a big fan favorite. It does see a lot of play, and again, I think they did an amazing job with just the design of the card. Next we have Solemn Simulacrum. This has been reprinted quite a bit over the years, and because of that, financially it's not a huge card. But you know what? Sad Robot sees a whole lot of play in a lot of different places. Commander, Cubes, you see this all the time, and it sees play in Eternal formats. It's an amazing card, so it's a really nice inclusion. I really like the new Sad Robot on the art. Soul Ring. This is an incredibly powerful card. Now, this card Financially isn't huge when you look at the fact that they've been trying to print this into oblivion with their Commander products over the years. And it's a fantastic Commander card. I think Wizards did a really good job of making sure pretty much everyone that wants a Soul Ring can get a Soul Ring, and I wish they would do that with more cards. But the power level of this card is still incredibly high. Honestly, when I play Vintage Cube, I would first pick this over Black Lotus in Limited. I think in Limited, this is maybe the best Magic card ever printed, quite honestly. If you're lucky enough to open this in a sealed pool or in Draft, and you can play with this in Limited, you got a leg up already on the whole Draft pod and everyone you'll be playing. Because if you can get this card out early, it is a monster. It just gives you such advantage for so little resources. The art's incredible. I like how they kind of took the art from the newer version, the more modern version of the card, which is the ring, and they almost combined it with the aura, fire aura that you saw from the original version from Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, Revised, and kind of put that style together, those two styles together in the art. Looks incredible. Maybe my favorite. This and Lotus Petal, back and forth, for my favorite of these. Static Orb, again, financially not a huge card, but this is really annoying to play against. I think it's actually included because if you have a Keen Eye, there is one of the Planeswalkers that has an ultimate ability that's very similar to this, and actually I think it is this exactly, so I'm sure that's why they included it. Steel Overseer. This card has pretty limited printings. It was printed in a core set, it got reprinted in a dual deck. It's still like a $15 card because it sees affinity play, so this is actually a cool inclusion. Swords. We have a few swords to look at. Now we're going to look at 3 swords. There's kind of like 5 in this cycle. 2 of them I assume will probably be an Aether Revolt, but we do get 3 here. Sword of Feast and Famine being the first. Sword of Fire and Ice, probably the most powerful one of the 5. At least in a lot of situations. Sword of Light and Shadow. And then we're going to move on to a couple Gearhulks to close things out. We have a Torrential Gearhulk, which I love that he's spraying the crowd with water. That's awesome. And finally, our last card is a Verdurous Gearhulk for green. Another really powerful card. So those are the inventions. If nothing else, hopefully you kind of got the feel for what they look like. You can keep your eyes open for them when you're playing this weekend coming up. Hopefully you open some of them. Good luck for sure. So having said that, that's the pre-release primer. Hopefully this helps a little bit, get you ready for the pre-release, let you know what to expect. Like I said, a lot of this, granted, is geared towards newer players. I mean, not all of it. Some of it I think can help all players, I hope anyway. But I want to say, first off, good luck to everyone. Good luck at your pre-release. I'm hoping to make it to one. I haven't been able to make it to the last couple because of work things and life things, but I did play Magic Online pre-releases, which is not the same, unfortunately. But hopefully I can. If not, I'll play on Magic Online, at least this time. At some point I'll get to go again. It kind of is what it is sometimes. We've all been there. But having said that, again, good luck to everyone. Hopefully get some great pulls and get some inventions. Let me know in the comments below how you do and what you pull. I always like to hear that stuff, especially if I don't get to go. And as always, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality content for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't yet had a chance to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.